Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another Reloading Chat, and today I want to talk to you guys about the Social Security gun ban. Now, this was overturned by the House less than 2 weeks ago. I want to say right around the start of the month. They went ahead and overturned this. The Obama administration had put it in, and we really need to understand the ramifications of this. We need to understand what was put forward here and why this is scary. That the left is able to put through laws like this. And what the left needs to be aware of, when they start doing stuff like this, that means the right is going to have similar power. So they need to be very, very careful what precedents they set. You know, because just like they're upset with Trump doing all these executive orders, well, Obama started it. Obama overstepped his bounds and set precedent and gave the president more power. Obama was the most powerful president the United States has ever had. The power and checks and balances got undone a little bit during his administration. And we told them, if you do this, we're going to use this same precedent to destroy you. We are going to make sweeping changes when we get a president in. The right wing said this to the left. They ignored us. All right, they just set another precedent. And what do I mean set a precedent? They had set a law in place that was going to revoke 75,000 American citizens' constitutional right, one of their rights, without due process. All right, without due process of law. Just by signing a bill, revoke their rights. So they need to think about what we can do with that. And the basis of it is because they're on government assistance. But it's not. It's Social Security, something they paid into. All right, it's something they paid into. It's being counted as government assistance. Well, they need to think about what all we could do. If government assistance gives us the right to pass laws to revoke people's constitutional rights, we can do a whole lot to people who are on welfare. We'll get to that in a minute. But what this was, the left and Obama had got a bill signed through that anyone who is on Social Security that looked like they needed help or assistance with their finances, anyone who had any sort of mental issue, whether it's depression or whatever, that contributed potentially to their Social Security that they got, Social Security disability, or elderly people on Social Security, all right, that if they had made certain criteria that they didn't have the full mental faculties to totally balance their bills or whatever, meaning they needed some sort of help doing their bills, doing their budget, whatever, that other people were having to help them in any way with stuff, that it was saying that they were mentally unfit to own a firearm. Without even looking at the fact of if they were mentally competent to be out on the street or be free or anything else. Without looking at the fact that if they were mentally competent to actually safely handle a firearm, which is two different things. You know, someone who's getting older and can't do math particularly well can still oftentimes clean and handle a firearm just fine. They can clean and handle a firearm just fine. I've known many elderly people on Social Security who still competed in shooting sports, such as my grandfather. Even when he had Alzheimer's, he was still accident-free and successfully shooting. Very, very well before his Alzheimer's really got bad. So what you have here is them ruling that people who are on Social Security who meet whatever criteria they have, that they can revoke their constitutional Second Amendment, just revoke it. And the problem with that is that under normal circumstances, mental illness is not enough. Someone being depressed or someone having whatever mental illness is not enough to have their Second Amendment revoked. And that's what the left need to understand. They can argue against this all they want. But the fact of the matter is, in order to have your gun rights revoked, it's the same process to have your voting rights revoked. A judge has to rule you mentally defective. You have to be adjudicated mentally defective by a court, with evidence presented to a court to prove that you are. And that is a big, big deal to have that happen. And I do know someone personally who's had that happen due to her own issues and everything. And a lot of it's medication-induced. Medications she has to have for a major illness she has have affected her mind in a way to where the courts did rule her mentally defective. So her husband has to keep all his firearms locked up to where she doesn't have access to them. You know, he carries every day. And then when he's home, he relocks it up in a touch box so that he can get to his handgun and she can't get to it. And then he's okay with the courts because he can't allow her access to his firearms because she can't have access to them legally. But she's been adjudicated mentally defective. So you have cases like this that are out there. They do exist, but you can't just do that without due process. If they're not given due process, you're taking away people's constitutional rights. Now the left is screaming, oh no, this is the Republicans. They've put a bunch of firearms back into the hands of mentally ill, mentally defective people, and it's not the case. What they've done is they've just taken old people who are on Social Security and targeted a bunch of them to have their rights revoked without due process. And what we would say to those people on the left, well, if you want their rights revoked, you need to use due process. You need to go take before a court all 75,000 of those individuals, present the evidence, and they are allowed to appear before the court. You can't revoke someone's rights like that without them appearing before the court. They get to speak on their own behalf before the judge. You don't get to just arbitrarily do this and just through an administrative process remove someone's constitutional rights. And again, being adjudicated mentally defective, that person gets to appear before the court. They have to be interviewed by a psychologist. That psychologist has to testify, and they can bring in their own expert witnesses. All right? And they get to speak to the court themselves and defend their stance as to why they're not mentally defective, why they're still logical, and why they're still reasonable. You don't get to just arbitrarily strip their gun rights without due process of law, because this is a constitutional right. This is like stripping someone's right to vote. It's like stripping someone's right to free speech. There is a process involved. They have to be adjudicated mentally defective. This is bypassing that process. And you know what? Okay, so what? Maybe some of them really are mentally defective. If you feel they are, that's the court's job to bring them before the court, for them to speak in their own defense on their own behalf, and to show that they are mentally cognizant. Okay? And whatever they have going on doesn't mean they're automatically dangerous. You know what? It's possible for a person to be depressed. It's possible for a person to have a delusion and still not be dangerous and still not be considered mentally defective enough that they lose their rights and need to be institutionalized. Because if that was the case, there's many public speakers who are millionaires off their public speaking who say things that would be considered totally crazy and insane. But that doesn't mean that they could be adjudicated mentally defective for that. Just because they believe something that's unusual or sounds crazy doesn't mean that. And that's what people need to understand. When you basically mentally defective means that you don't have the ability to know right from wrong anymore. That you are incapable of reasoning things through. All right, you're not capable of making reasonable judgments anymore. You're not capable of following logic. You're incapable of determining right from wrong. Someone who would be mentally defective and would lose their gun rights would be someone who doesn't understand in their head that if they shoot someone, they die and don't come back. That if they point a gun at someone and pull the trigger, that it's wrong if it was an innocent person. And that if they die, that they don't understand what death means. You have people who've lost touch with their reason. All right, that's what we're talking about. And to just say, oh, because they're whatever, we're just going to have an administrator do an administrative ruling without any testimony from them in their own defense before a court, do something that requires a court to do. That's a problem. And that is what they've overturned. And we need to be very aware of that, because here's the precedent they're setting. Had this been allowed to stand, we've now set a precedent that says that someone on government assistance, an administrator, can determine that their constitutional rights, certain ones, can be revoked. Well, if that's the case, we could also go through and remove other constitutional rights. Everyone on welfare, we could just look through and select through a system which ones we maybe see unfit to be producing children and just sterilize them. In fact, that would actually probably solve a lot of things. And here's the thing, the left says, well, this will solve a lot of problems, so we should do this. This is why this is doing this. We can cut through the red tape and just solve a problem. Well, we could argue, the right could argue, well, we could just sterilize everyone on welfare. We could stop multi-generational welfare that way. Why don't we just do that? You know why we don't do that? Because they still have rights. They're American citizens. They're guaranteed rights. And some of those rights are that we just can't treat them like cattle to where we sterilize them. Sure, it would solve a lot of problems. It'd save us a fortune in future welfare. But it's also a violation of their constitutional rights. So this is where we get into the debates of, do people's rights, individual rights, do they outweigh the greater good of the common good of society? This is the debate that we now enter. And the law of this land states that people's constitutional rights still matter. There are going to be times when we do have to test that. There are going to be times when we do actually step back and say, okay, this constitutional right of these specific individual probably is going to be outweighed by the greater good when it reaches a certain threshold. But you know what? Those are going to be individual arguments that we're going to argue and fight in politics and court and public opinion every single time. All right? And in this case, there's already a system in place to remove people's gun rights who are mentally defective. But there is a court legal system in place already. You don't get to just do it administratively. And that's what was overturned. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.